Hi guys, so today's video is aimed at National 5 Fashion and Textiles, and today's focus is looking at finishings of fabrics. Specifically today we're going to be looking at the overlocker. There will be a part 2 video. For those that don't have an overlocker, you can be using things like a zigzag stitch on your normal sewing machine, or pinking shears. We'll also cover bound edges as well using a bias binding. As I said, today is all about the overlocker. Okay, so the reason we would use an overlocker on different fabrics is I've got, in front of me here, I've got a woven fabric and I've got a knitted fabric. The woven fabric, you can see, is quite rigid. There's not much movement in it, and that's because of the way it's been woven, with the warp and the weft threads interlocking like that. There's no give in those yarns at all. And the knitted fabric here provides us with a huge amount of stretch. So you can see what I'm wearing just now is a knitted item. There's no shaping in it, it's just the stretch that fits the contours of my body. So that, we would need an overlocker for that, because a straight stitch that you see here using the normal sewing machine, those stitches, if my garment was to stretch, those straight stitches are just going to burst on the knitted fabric. So you're better creating your item, your leggings, your vest tops, anything that's stretchy, using a zigzag or an overlocking stitch. For the woven fabrics, these yarns you can see with the cut raw edge of the fabric are just going to come away. This is called fraying, when the warp and weft threads start to just peel away, and you can see this happening here. And if this was to fray all the way down to your stitch line, then your seam allowance is going to decrease and there's not going to be any secure hold on the fabric, so you'd end up with a hole in your seams. Okay, so we're going to finish the edges of the seams and bind them with the overlocker, and then I'm going to show you how to do that with the knitted fabric as well. Okay, so first thing I'm going to show you is the overlocker and the setup of it. Okay, so first thing I'm going to tell you about is this overlocker here is a 4-thread overlocker. You can get 5-thread overlockers. You can also use it with just the 3 threads as well. They are quite complicated to thread up, so ideally you wouldn't be looking to thread that up. What you've got here is your thread cones that come up over the tension arm. They each have an individual tension disc. Each of these threads need to go sit in that, and then there's quite a complex network of threading up in the interior of the machine, like so. It comes with 2 needles, and like a normal sewing machine, it has the take-up lever, so you press a foot lever at the back of the machine that lifts and controls this. It also has your feed dog that controls your fabric, and it also has your balance wheel at the side here. So there's a couple of similarities with the sewing machine. Again, you're always turning the balance wheel towards you, and the foot must be down to work the mechanics of to sew your fabric, sorry. Okay, the rest of this, it comes with a guide, usually most machines do, and my top tip is, if you do break a thread, take all the threads out and rethread from right to left. Okay, so do this one first, then this one, then this one, then this one, and then thread up your needles. But ideally you shouldn't need to do that. What these machines do come with is a blade in here, and you can see as I turn my balance wheel towards me, this arm here is moving up and down, and that is going to cut the fabric. So we have a nice clean edge. It will remove any of your frayed edges of the fabric, and then the stitching is formed right on the side of that. Okay, so I'm going to get started and show you how to finish the edge of one side of fabric. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is just finishing off a single ply of fabric. So first thing, you can see this is starting to fray here. I'm going to set this up so that the blade is just going to cut off that small amount of fringing from the fray. Okay, so I've placed it under the foot with the blade about to cut off that extra amount. Place the presser foot down. Okay, now this is going to be quite noisy as I put my foot down. Okay, and you can see there the stitching effect that this machine has. So the 4 threads there, you've got 2 of the needle threads that stitch along here, and then the other threads are called the loopers, and they're the ones that loop over the edge of the machine. You can also see that it continues to form the chain of stitching as you put the foot down, and that's quite handy. You can just pull this away from the machine, and my machine has a little blade here so I can cut off those tails there. If you were to cut it too sharp, then it's going to start to unravel just at the end, so actually you're best with just a wee tail at the side there. Okay, I would then want to take that to the ironing board and press that flat. So that's quite handy if you want to finish off a hem with an overlocked edge. You would just overlock all the way around your hem. You might then want to turn your hem up and stitch it up this way. Okay, so that saves bulk on your seam. If you are hemming and you don't want to have to fold twice, then you would just overlock once and stitch up once. Okay, so it reduces the bulk. Right, the next thing I'm going to show you is then how to finish off 2 plies of fabric, and this time we're going to stitch the 2 plies together. So this is a single seam. We're going to, the seam's already been created, we've stitched the 2 pieces of fabric together, and now I'm just going to overlock the 2 edges together so that they can't open, and that'll be nice and neat. Again, lift it up, lift my presser foot up. I'm just cutting just enough off with the blade there, just a small amount. I want to retain as much of my seam allowance as possible. Okay, and then nice and neat, I've got my my overlocked closed seam there. So what I would then do, once that item was finished, I could then open that seam out and press it flat, and my seam would press all in the one direction because I can no longer open it. The next thing I'm going to show you is an open seam. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlock down one side of the seam and then do the same on the other side of the seam so we can actually press it open. So this time I'm keeping the seam open as it goes under the foot, cutting off just a small amount. You can see there the amount of threads that I'm actually cutting off. It really is just the fluff and the frayed edges. Now that's completed, what I would do is open up my 2 sides of the fabric and press this seam open here. So what you should maybe do is have a wee look at the types of clothing that you've got at home. Do you have items that have a finished seam like this? Okay, so maybe your hem edges have a finished edge with just a single overlocking over the finished edge. Do you have any garments that have them closed like this? Okay, and do you have any that are finished on the inside like that? The next thing I'm going to show you is how to do that with a knitted fabric. Again, with all knitted fabrics, it's really important that as you're sewing, you don't pull and stretch out your fabric because you're going to end up with a very wonky seam. I think I'll show you, I'll demonstrate that on this edge actually. So on this side here, keep my 2 edges together. You can see I've not sewn these together. This has not been put together and seamed with my normal sewing machine. As I said before, those straight stitches would just burst if they came under any strain. So under the foot, and this time I'm just easing into the fabric to the machine foot. There we go, so that's staying nice and straight. It's not being stretched out at all. And because we've got the 2 threads here, when I come to open that out, it should look like a normal seam on the inside. Okay. So I'll show you what that looks like if it's been stretched, just so you can learn by these mistakes. Okay, so under the house, and I'm going to pull this tight. And what happens there is we've now got, remember this was the same size as this, we've now got a wobbly edge. So if you were to wear something like that, it's going to sit really bumpy and wavy on your body. So making sure that you don't pull or stretch your fabric as it goes through the machine. In fact, you're actually easing it in. We've cut off all of the edges here, and these looper threads have finished off the edge of the fabric quite nicely. And you can see why we use the Overlocker machine now with a knitted fabric, because I can pull, I can stretch this fabric, and these stitches are staying intact. There's no strain on them, as opposed to if I'd done it with a straight stitch, then they would all just break and then your seams would break. Right guys, that is your first tutorial on fabric finishes. So what I've covered with you today is the basics of the overlocker. I wouldn't be expecting you to be rethreading this or anything just now. I might do a more advanced tutorial on threading the machine later. What I've covered with you is a finished edge on a single ply, a finished edge on a seam, on a closed seam there, finished edge on an open seam, and sewing the finished edge or creating even your seams with the overlocker. Okay guys, thanks very much. Remember, any feedback and like and subscribe. Take care, see you soon, bye.